I love Star Trek. I grew up watching it, particularly TNG and Voyager, with my parents, especially my dad. We had all of the episodes on DVD, so we would watch one episode every night, and I would always beg for just one more. Star Trek sparked my imagination, and I think a lot of the morality tales that it preached really stuck with me in an extremely foundational way. It's a huge part of who I am, and probably my favorite show, or more accurately, franchise. I could talk about Star Trek endlessly with basically anyone who will listen, so today I am going to talk about it with you. Hello, my name is Ren. This is Ren Rants, a channel where I talk about things that I care about with a particular focus on pop culture and politics. I think what I love most about Star Trek is that it made me imagine a future that I actually wanted to be a part of, as opposed to the more sinister and, let's be real, much more likely cyberpunk fare. One of the only things I love as much as Star Trek is animation. Cartoons, anime, adult animation, 2D, CGI, raunchy, slice of life, heartfelt, every style, every genre, I just love it all. Like Star Trek, a lot of animated shows and movies have creative settings and premises, but many also pull off really strong emotion-driven storytelling as well.
Yes, I've dreamed about you a lot since you disappeared. What did you want to tell me?
The almost limitless capacity of animation to bring outlandish characters and stories to life has always captivated me. When animation is good, it is so good. So you'd think Star Trek the Animated Series would do it for me. And don't get me wrong, the animated series is fun, but it's also very much a product of its time. I mean, it basically is just the original series, but with new animated adventures and even more ham. Not bad by any means, just not something that I would find myself getting absorbed in. You know, I'd watch an episode here or there, it's not really something that I would binge. But despite this, you can imagine my excitement when in July of 2019, Star Trek Lower Decks was announced. Lower Decks was created by Mike McMahon, a writer on Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites. It's produced by Alex Kurtzman, a controversial figure in the Star Trek fandom. He has a dizzying amount of writing credits, including Xena the Warrior Princess, the Transformers franchise, The Legend of Zorro, Mission Impossible 3. But he has also been heavily involved in the Star Trek franchise since the 2009 reboot, which I actually really enjoyed. And Star Trek Into Darkness, which I really didn't.
My name is Khan.
Why? He has produced and written for Star Trek Discovery and Picard, and he's involved with the short Trek videos as well. I think the fairest assessment of Kurtzman's impact on modern Trek is that it is a mixed bag. Some of what he's done, like, as I mentioned, the 2009 movie, Discovery, Lower Decks, and some of the short Treks, work really well. I think he actually does have some talent, and despite what some people say, a decent grasp on the Trek franchise. But he is also responsible for disasters like Into Darkness or the extremely uneven first season of Picard. I'm excited for Strange New Worlds, and who knows, maybe Picard will get better in season 2. Either way, I'm very excited to see Q.
The trial never ends.
Q. I am way too old for your bullshit.
I'm actually really grateful for what Kurtzman has done to revitalize the Trek franchise. I do think he's responsible for a lot of content for us to love, while also getting a lot of new fans interested in classic Trek. I think that some of the vitriol directed towards him at this point is a little bit overblown. But this is not a video about Alex Kurtzman. We are here to talk about Star Trek Lower Decks. The series gets its name from the Next Generation episode of the same name, in which we follow junior officers on the periphery of a dangerous mission on the Enterprise while they try to do their jobs with the information that they're given. In my opinion, and that of Mike McMahon, Lower Decks is one of the best TNG episodes and one of the best episodes of any Star Trek, period. McMahon really liked the idea of focusing on junior officers and the more menial jobs while putting the big A storyline in the background and the senior officers playing more of a supporting role. McMahon characterized the series as a love letter to Trek, and personally, I think that is absolutely true and sums up the tone of the series perfectly. The premise of the series is pretty simple. We follow 4 junior officers among the crew of the Cerritos, a second contact ship responsible for dotting the I's and crossing the T's after the bigger, flashier ships have made first contact. It's basically a comedic look at the less important ships in the Federation and the wacky adventures of their day-to-day through the eyes of low-ranking officers. The USS Cerritos is a California-class ship, which all have the names of cities in California: Merced, Rubidoux, Solvang, etc. And their shuttlecraft are named for California state parks. It's not as big or luxurious as the Enterprise. Our junior officers don't even have remotely private quarters to sleep in. They are in communal bunks in a hallway, and they use communal showers, but it gets the job done. The primary junior officers that we follow are Beckett Mariner, played by Tawny Newsome, who is extremely competent but has a chip on her shoulder and regularly, knowingly self-sabotages to avoid the pressure of higher ranks. Brad Boimler, a sweet, neurotic goofball of a man played by Jack Quaid, is our put-upon-everyman, but he also has more going on than meets the eye, and he is an extremely dedicated and resourceful officer. Sam Rutherford, played by Eugene Cordero, is a cyborg engineer with a heart of gold, and a lot of time is spent on his friendship with Devana Tendi, played by Noelle Wells, a wholesome and good Orion who must be protected at all costs. If the darkness of Discovery and Picard were off-putting to you,
Hey, who turned out the lights?
as they initially were to me, Lower Decks turns the lights back on. The ship is brightly lit, and the palette for most episodes is vivid and colorful. Visually, it definitely does remind me of Rick and Morty, Final Space, Futurama, and basically every other sci-fi animated series. They all use the same technique of blending 2D and 3D animation for some of the more flashy effects, and it does work really well. But I will say Lower Decks still has its own visual flavor, and it does of course also take a lot of aesthetic influences from live-action Star Trek. One criticism that I did see and kind of initially buy when the promo materials for Star Trek Lower Decks were coming out was that on a superficial level, the crew does kind of resemble the crew in Final Space, but the shows really just are not remotely similar. The characters aren't similar. I would say it's just one of those things that initially it kind of does look like it might be an issue on the surface, but once you actually watch both shows side by side, there's definitely not enough to make any kind of a court case out of it. And even just on a surface level from like the audience perspective, I just really don't feel like Lower Decks ripped off Final Space at all. They're totally different shows. I love them both so much, and I will be doing a video on Final Space in the future, but I don't really think that comparison holds any water. That's not to say that Lower Decks is the most original thing in the world. It does rely on a lot of tropes from older Trek episodes, and it does remix a lot of things that we've seen before, but I think that's part of its charm, and it's done in a very intentional way, so I love it. Unlike the other modern Trek shows that we've gotten so far, while there is some continuity between the episodes and ongoing character arcs, the series is largely episodic, with the Cerritos going on different second contact missions and other adventures for the Federation. A lot of the conflicts are interpersonal, and there's just like swarms of Trek references in every episode. They make fun of everything from how some crewmen say sensors.
Well, nothing at first, but the long-range sensors reveal...
Whoa. I am sorry. Are you trying to say the word sensors? Because to me, you're saying sensors. What is that?
To the Da Vinci hologram from Voyager.
Not today! Not on a Da Vinci SWAT!
Or the ship concerts from TNG-era Trek.
That was titled Essence. I wrote it about my mom. This next piece is also about my mom.
Wrap it up, nerd. Alright, I don't know what this is called, and I don't care. 2, 3, come on.
The show captures the feeling of Star Trek while lovingly poking fun at it. Even the theme song, which features a grand trumpeting orchestral score and sweeping scenes of the Cerritos flying through space, also features it crashing into things. It encapsulates the balance of making an enjoyable Trek show while also making fun of the things about Trek that are just silly. And if we're being honest, there's a lot of material.
I protest. I am not a merry man.
The relationships our characters have with each other and the command structure is the backbone of Lower Decks. The story contains a rich cast of main and supporting characters who we spend significant time with. There is more continuity than you would really see in Voyager or TNG, while still being much less serialized than the newer Trek shows that we've received so far. So we do get to see the relationships change and deepen over time as we get to know them better. There's also a lot of commentary on the chain of command.
You know what the chain of command is? It's a chain I go get and beat you with till you understand who's in command here.
And how the junior officers are often kept in the dark during dangerous missions. Some of it is a little on the nose, but for the most part, I think it does the commentary angle a lot more successfully than Star Trek Picard did.
You are in peril, Admiral.
There's no peril here. Only the pitiable delusions of a once great man desperate to matter.
The fact that it's animated means they can execute all kinds of cool aliens, planets, and effects without having to worry about prosthetics or huge CGI budgets. So they aren't afraid to go big and go weird. In the first episode, we get an alien virus that overtakes the ship and a creative solution involving some bizarre alien livestock.
Let it eat him.
She's seen her before. She's just coming on him to suck out some moisture.
Oh, okay, hey, Brad, good news, buddy. So it's just suckling you. I've just learned. You're fine.
While all the classic Trek aliens are still there, and notably they stick with the TNG-era Klingon designs.
Logical. Are you a Vulcan now? Maybe you should trim your bangs and join a science vessel.
Logical. Could you imagine serving with those big knots? Avoid death and cover.
It's a lot easier to do aliens that aren't just humans with some latex on their foreheads and noses. The planets and the anomalies that we see are a fun mix of the familiar and the new, but all are rendered in a visually striking style. The stories are imaginative and sometimes do still have fun Star Trek twists and ethical questions, but it is generally secondary to exploring the relationship between the junior officers and their interactions with the bridge crew. It is definitely a cartoon, so a lot of things about it are cartoony. But particularly with some of the more violent stuff, I actually think it works really well for preserving the overall lighter tone that I generally am looking for in a Trek series. I'd say it's about as suitable for children as any classic Trek series, although it does have some darker moments and raunchy humor, so you may want to watch the episodes beforehand, especially if you have like younger children. It is an incredibly fun show with a lot of heart. It isn't perfect though. My main criticisms would be that sometimes it's a little bit too fast-paced, so it's hard to keep up with the action, or the A and B storylines end up being a little bit hard to follow. This is partially because these episodes are all around the 23 to 25 minute mark, so they have a lot less time to cover comparable ground to other Trek series, so I think a lot of the time it just ends up feeling a little bit rushed. They just try to pack so much into every episode, and sometimes I just feel like there isn't the time. It would also be nice if there was a little bit more emotional resonance here and there. And to be clear, it's not like the show doesn't have heart and a strong emotional core as is. It's just, I feel like something like Futurama or Final Space does do a better job of blending the character-driven comedy with incredibly touching and emotional storytelling. And it seems like there have been a lot of kind of opportunities to do that, but they just weren't able to really fulfill the potential of those stories in a way that was as impactful as I've seen in other like animated sci-fi series.
I'll never forget him. He forgot me a long, long time ago.
Seymour will never forget you, never. Especially because the entire conceit of the series is based on a particularly emotionally impactful episode of TNG. I just hoped we'd see a little bit more of things like the aftermath of losing crewmates or experiencing particularly traumatic missions, even if the overall tone of the show is lighter and more comedy focused. Sometimes it feels like the writers are a little bit scared to explore those kinds of episodes with any real depth, and it feels like a missed opportunity. Although it does look like they might actually be building towards more of that in future episodes with Tendy's reaction to a friend's near-death experience. There are some jokes that might make some audience members a little bit uncomfortable. For example, in a season 2 episode where Pleasant Fountains Lie, a crewman is put in the position of being coerced into schmex. He doesn't really seem interested in having it and seems very much to want to keep his virginity intact. Ultimately, the crew are good allies and do what they can to help him get out of the situation, but some of the stuff that's played for laughs is a little bit uncomfortable. For the most part, though, the jokes are funny, centered on Star Trek, and they usually don't punch down. When I initially read that the creator wrote for Rick and Morty, I was a little bit worried. I was kind of concerned the series would end up with like a similarly nihilistic tone, but I really couldn't have been more wrong. That said, I generally don't see a ton of what I would consider valid criticisms of Lower Decks from people. Most of what I have seen is complaints about forced diversity. Also, the white men apparently feel like Boimler is bad representation despite him being portrayed as talented, loyal, and good.
Oh, you trusted me!
Nah, I used you.
What?
I've been using your power cell to send a distress signal. You were too busy scheming to notice. You've been boimed.
This is a Brad Boimler appreciation channel. One particular criticism I hear a lot of the time is that Mariner is a Mary Sue. As y'all know, I hate that phrase. But it also really doesn't apply, like even a little bit. Beckett Mariner is incredibly capable in a lot of ways. She's proficient at combat, she's resourceful in a pinch, and she has a lot of connections with other ships and starbases. Her mother is the captain of the Cerritos, her father is an admiral. In the first episode, we find out she's served on 5 ships and was recently placed on the Cerritos after being demoted from the Quito. She has a complicated relationship with her mother and with the command structure.
That's it. When we get back to the ship, you are going straight to... Yeah, I know. Straight to the brig. Shocker. Oh, you're not going to the brig. You're going to therapy. What?
She's always stashing contraband on board.
Vanilla whiskey is against regulation. Yeah, because it's awesome.
And her rash decisions get her and other officers in trouble all the time. She spends a lot of time in the brig.
You just earned an extra day in the brig.
Joke's on you, man. I love the brig. I'm going to my favorite place.
She can be short-sighted, short-tempered, and even a little bit selfish, but she's also a good and loyal friend, and despite her tough exterior, she's actually really vulnerable and insecure, particularly because she's actually had a lot of trouble making friends in the past. But she can also be a bit insensitive, and she does get called out for it.
Devana? Is that some other weird title you've got?
It's my name.
Oh.
What, you don't even know my first name?
She's a flawed person who is still trying to figure herself out, and she's definitely not portrayed as perfect. Her relationship with the captain is actually a huge source of friction, and again, she is constantly getting in her own way. Sometimes on purpose, because she's afraid of the challenges and pressures that go along with being a higher ranking officer. So she deliberately does not fulfill her own potential. It seems like anytime there is a female character who is more competent than average, someone is going to say Mary Sue into a mirror 3 times until a fedora appears. It's such a sloppy and misapplied term, and it just doesn't fit Mariner at all. But I really don't think it fits most of the characters it's applied to. But that was another video. I digress. Overall, though, most people really enjoy Lower Decks, and I can see why. It took me a while to give it a chance because I was worried it would be edgy or a lazy cash grab or just wouldn't really hit the tone right. But when I finally did sit down to watch it, I found myself pleasantly surprised and unable to stop, so I did watch all of it. I watched all of season 1, and then I have to wait for season 2. I have to wait for every episode like some kind of animal. Streaming has ruined me. The animation is good, the stories are fun, and it is a love letter to Trek with incredibly likable characters. Even if you aren't a big Star Trek fan, I would say you'd probably enjoy this show if you like animated sci-fi like Futurama, Final Space, Rick and Morty. If you aren't really into animation, but like Star Trek, you'll still love this show. It has everything that we love about classic Trek, with a fresh perspective from low-ranking officers, and lots of in-jokes and references to make you feel at home. I also think Lower Decks would be particularly appealing to fans who really like classic Trek, but aren't as into Star Trek Discovery or Picard because of the darker tones that those series tend to have. Lower Decks is much closer in tone to 80s to early 2000s era Trek, and it really helps fill that void left by TNG and Voyager in particular. I call those the hotel conference room ships because that's always the vibe that it gives me, just kind of, you know, a little more laid back. There's also a lot of cameos from characters and actors that we know and love.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We're still at red alert. Target those ships and fire.
We're talking about this later.
And callbacks to previous encounters and anomalies in classic Trek episodes. It is the perfect blend of the old and the new. If you haven't seen it already, you absolutely should check it out. So let me know what you thought about Lower Decks if you've seen it in the comment section down below. Tell me what your favorite episode is. But that is all that I have for you on this. See you next time.